Thank you for joining us this morning for part two of recipe management. It's a slightly different webinar today. Today is more of a sneak peek of what's to come with regards to recipe management when we release Cscape 10. This is roughly about 15 minutes, and as always, if you have any questions, just feel free to put them into the questions panel and we shall get to them at the end.
Welcome to today's tutorial. Let's get started. Let's look at our agenda for today. Today we're looking at Cscape recipe management, and this is the second part in a two-part series. First, we'll do a quick review of part 1 that we looked at last week. If you haven't seen that, you can go back and view it in the webinar section on the Horner website. Then, mainly, we'll be talking about recipes in Cscape 10. We'll talk about improvements that have been made in the recipe editor as well as in the recipe graphical object. We'll also have a live demonstration where we will preview the recipe functionality in Cscape 10. Note also that Cscape 10 builds upon the current recipe capability, so everything we showed about recipes in part 1 in Cscape 9.9 is still applicable. Now we'll quickly review what we looked at in part 1, starting with the Cscape recipe editor. The recipe editor is a tool which allows processed recipes to be represented as a spreadsheet with ingredients and products in rows and columns, like a temperature set point or a material quantity, etc. Each product is the result of running the process with a unique combination of set points for each process variable. The spreadsheet that you're using in the recipe editor is a CSV file that resides in the micro SD card at runtime. So on the machine, when you want to run a new product, you're loading a recipe from the memory card from that CSV file, and the machine will run that to produce the product. Next, let's look at the graphical recipe objects. The recipe object is built into the graphical capability of the OCS built into Cscape. The graphical object is a configurable set of buttons, and those buttons allow you to view, load, edit, and save recipes. In addition, you'll also typically utilize the standard numeric data objects to display or edit the current ingredient values that are loaded or running on the machine. There's also function blocks available in the logic. These allow you to set up your OCS to automatically load recipes. If the OCS is changing the process parameters as it runs the product, we also have a save recipe function that can be used to automatically save those changes. Now I'll look at the general workflow I use for the recipe functionality in Cscape. Keep in mind that when you add recipe capability to an OCS application, you're typically doing that at the very end of your application development. So you can start with either an Excel spreadsheet that you create that includes products and ingredients along with your values, or you can start in the Cscape recipe editor where you can create that spreadsheet from scratch. Then in the Cscape recipe editor, either after importing your own spreadsheet as a CSV file or building one from scratch, you're going to tie each ingredient to a process variable. Once you've completed the recipe editing, you're going to have to decide how you want recipes to be loaded when you run a new product. Do you want it to be triggered by an operator, or do you want it to be triggered automatically in the logic, or some combination of both? To have an operator be able to load in a recipe, you'll need to create a user interface for that operator, including recipe buttons and standard data objects. If you want automatic loading and saving of recipes, that means writing logic using the recipe function blocks. Next, you must make sure that the CSV recipe spreadsheet file that you created in step 1 ends up on the micro SD card so the OCS can use it at runtime. You can set up Cscape to download that spreadsheet automatically, or just manually copy it over yourself using manual file copy type tools. That concludes our review of what we looked at in part 1. Now let's move on to Cscape 10 recipes. First, let's talk about Cscape 10 itself. Cscape 10 is the next major release of Cscape, which has been years in the making. Cscape 10 offers major advancements in the user environment and in graphics, which includes the recipe objects. You'll be able to use Cscape 10 with any current OCS model. However, new OCS models are needed to take advantage of all those graphical enhancements and will be released concurrently with Cscape 10. The primary enhancement in Cscape 10 when it comes to recipes is a new and improved graphical recipe object. Now in Cscape 9.9, the graphical recipe object is a collection of configurable buttons such as load, edit, save, etc., which you use along with regular data objects to build your own user interface from scratch so the operator can manage recipes. In Cscape 10 we have a new graphical recipe object, which is a single advanced object that's highly configurable and offers a great feature-rich user experience at runtime. Now let's look at those new enhancements. On the left hand side of the object you've got a product list. Those are all the different products that the operator can choose from when they want to load a new recipe or load a new product. You can scroll up and down if you have more products available than will fit vertically in the object. In the top right hand corner you'll see the current selected object has a window where it's also displayed. Underneath that you'll see where all your ingredients are listed in columns. If there's more ingredients than will fit in the space allotted, you can scroll left to right to go through them. In the bottom right you have built-in control buttons. We'll cover each of these in turn. First, let's talk in more detail about ingredients. Now we've added some additional features to what you can display along with your ingredients. Of course, you have your ingredient name and its current value, as well as its engineering units. You can also include a graphic thumbnail if you choose for each of your ingredients. That can help make the experience for the user better and allows them to see the different ingredients visually. Again, if you have more ingredients than will fit in the space allotted, you can scroll back and forth along the list of available ingredients. Next, let's look at the products by themselves. On the left, we have the product list, which can scroll up and down as needed. The selected product is also displayed in a product window in the upper right hand side. The product list itself is optional. If you don't have a lot of space to list all of the products along the left, and you prefer just to have the operator select the product from the product window, you can omit the product list. Now let's talk about the control buttons that are available for the recipe object in Cscape 10. For this feature we have omitted textual descriptions in the button so everything is an icon. And that works really well typically as long as the users understand what the icons mean. So in addition to trying to select meaningful icons, we've also added an operator help button. And I'll show you how that works at runtime. So for instance, if the operator has any uncertainty about what a button does, they can use that help button to answer that question. You can see that on the right hand side. Next, you have the button to open a new recipe file. That's probably the button that would be most likely to be omitted. Keep in mind, when you configure the recipe object, you can omit any of these buttons that you don't want. Next, we have the Load Selected Product button, represented by the down arrow icon, and you use this to load the recipe for a new product. If you just want to view a particular product, then we also have the View Selected Product button. We also have the Add/Duplicate Selected Product button for adding more products. Then we also have the Delete Selected Product button. For that, you can use user access capability, so the user must log in to a higher access level in order to actually utilize the recipe object. Then finally, we have the Save Changes to Selected Product button, so you can save any changes you've made. In terms of the recipe editor dialog box itself in Cscape 10, this hasn't changed much. It still remains highly functional. The main thing that was added is the ability to add a graphic thumbnail for your products or your ingredients or both. The dialog box that allows you to configure your recipe object and tie that to a specific recipe allows you to decide if you want to include that product list or not. It also gives you the ability to configure the width of the column for your ingredients. Then at the bottom you have the list of all the operator buttons that you can decide to include or not to include. Now let's begin our demo where I will show that recipe functionality in Cscape 10 that we were looking at. Here I have an early version of Cscape 10 and you'll see a lot of things are different, but today we're highlighting the capabilities of the recipe object. Here I have a screen with my recipe object already configured. It also includes some numeric data objects so I can view the parameters that are currently loaded in the machine. I also have text across the top, a jump button and some other features. Whenever you're working with recipes, you're either going to start from a spreadsheet that lists your ingredients and your products, or you can just go straight into the Cscape recipe editor. In Cscape 10, the recipe editor is accessed here. As you can see, it looks the same as it does in Cscape 9.9, just with the added capability of adding graphics to your ingredients and also to your products. We'll start by looking at the ingredients first. And the only differences here between Cscape 9.9 and Cscape 10 is this thumbnail graphic, as well as the ability to determine the style of editing object that you want your operator to be able to manipulate. So if you want to be able to change the values using a numeric keypad, you can select numeric keypad. If you want to use a spinner object, you can also select spinner. It happens to be grayed out here, but it will be available when Cscape 10 is launched. Note that this particular demo was written using register-based advanced ladder, and if it was created in variable-based advanced ladder instead of a registered number, here you would see a variable that was tied to this ingredient, and each ingredient is then tied to a specific process variable. Then over here for your product configuration, you can configure the name as well as a thumbnail. Once you've completed your setup using the recipe editor, then you need to determine how you're going to load recipes, manage recipes, etc. So either with an operator or with logic or a combination of both. In Cscape 10 you have a rich recipe object that can make the experience great for the operator. This recipe object was created with the product list on the left, which is optional. Later I'll show you a screen that was created without the product list. Here's where you can configure the width of your ingredient columns in terms of pixels. Down here is where you determine which of these buttons is going to be present in your application. The only one that you can't disable is the help button. Then everything that a standard graphical object has, such as attributes, access level, legend, etc. is available here at the bottom. Now I'll show you another screen with another recipe object, but this one doesn't have the product list included. So you can see what that looks like here. It's set up the same way, the only difference is the show product list option was unchecked. Instead, you simply have the product selection made here in this section of the object at runtime. Now let's look at what those screens could look like running on an OCS. So here's my OCS running the recipe capability for Cscape 10. There's a few things that are different with the object at runtime than what you see in the preview in Cscape. The first thing is you have the ability to see specifically which of your products is actually running on the machine through this icon here. That indicates even though Cafe Mocha may be highlighted or selected, Espresso is actually the product that's currently loaded, and note that the icon is the same as the load icon. So as we select different products, you can see this area up here indicates the product that's selected, but not necessarily the product that's loaded. So if we want to load the recipe for black coffee, I first need to highlight or select black coffee as I've done here, and then I need to press the load button. First, let's say I don't remember which button that is. Then I can press the help button to refresh my memory, as every time I press the help button it shows the functionality of each button in turn. Then when I'm done with that help, after a few seconds that goes away. So now when I go to load black coffee, that then gives us an "Are you sure?" pop-up box, and I can say OK, and now the parameters have been loaded for black coffee. Now let's look at what our object looks like where we don't have a product list, and how does it vary in terms of how it operates. So I'll jump to that screen. In this case I can still select my product, I just use this tool instead. As you can see here, black coffee is currently running. If I want to select a different product, I just use the arrows here. Let's say Cafe Mocha is what I want. So I select that and again press the load button. Now let's return to our other recipe screen and let's look at how we might add a product. As you can see here, we have just 4 products available, which are cappuccino, black coffee, espresso and cafe mocha. Let's say we want to add white coffee also, which is just black coffee with a bit of milk. For this, we need to highlight the product that we want to copy. Once that's selected, we'll press the Add Product button, which is this button here. Now you'll notice that we have added a fifth product. This arrow has shown up to indicate that there's more products available at the bottom of our list. So I can scroll up, and now you can see there's a black coffee copy that's been created. I want it to be named white coffee, so I need to rename that. For this, we can use this function. By pressing the product display area, I can now rename it by typing that in and hitting enter. I'll cut to that now. Now I've renamed my recipe. You'll notice I can't change the graphics. So that's one thing that is a limitation. So you might want to have a generic graphic for a field created recipe. Now I need to change this to make it white coffee by adding milk to the ingredients. So let's add a bit of milk. I'll change that from a value of 0 milliliters to a value of 20 milliliters. Okay, now I've changed that, so I need to save it. If I were to leave this recipe or load in a different product and then come back again to white coffee, it would go back to 0 milliliters for milk. So I need to save this away using the save button. Then it asks, do you want to save this recipe to the coffee recipe spreadsheet, and I'll hit OK. Now I've added white coffee to my list. So if I load black coffee, for instance, you'll see there's no milk. So if I load it and look at the value for milk in my loaded values, you will see that's 0. And then let's scroll down and load white coffee. I'll hit load product and then hit OK. And then in my loaded values, you'll see my value of 20 for milk is still there, showing that as saved. That concludes our preview of recipe functionality in Cscape 10. Thank you for joining us for today's tutorial, and the Q&A session will begin shortly.
Okay, a nice little peek forward to what's coming down the line. I'll just see if we have any questions regarding that. Not that I can see so far. So I'll take you back to my screen. Okay, so we have unique Cscape function blocks next week, followed by hands-on with Cscan, and then Cscan with Smart Rail IO. As you can see here, just note we are exhibiting at SPS in Italy, so we will be away on the 26th. There'll be no webinar that day, but we will resume the schedule directly after that. Other than that, I don't see anything in regarding questions. Thank you all for joining us again this morning, and we hope to see you again next week. Have a good day.